Hello and welcome to this space for reflection and inner growth. Today we will delve into a territory that, although often avoided, feared, and even stigmatized in our contemporary society, is intrinsic, inseparable, and profoundly formative in the human experience: pain. We live in a culture that frequently, almost obsessively, impels us to seek constant pleasure, perpetual comfort, and to elude any form of discomfort, unease, or suffering. From the innumerable and seductive advertising messages that promise us seamless happiness through consumption, to our own internal programming, forged by past experiences and social conditioning, we are taught, directly or indirectly, that pain is something anomalous, a kind of error in the system, an enemy to be conquered, pharmacologically suppressed, distracted from, or ignored at all costs. But what if I told you that this perspective, although superficially understandable and humanly natural, could be profoundly limiting our potential for authentic growth, our innate capacity for resilience in the face of life's adversities, and our ability to find a deeper, more transcendent meaning in the complex tapestry of our existence? Inspired by ancestral wisdom, that vast reserve of knowledge distilled over millennia by diverse cultures and spiritual traditions, and particularly by the teachings of masters of introspection and inner strength like Shi Heng Yi, whose perspectives draw from ancient traditions such as Shaolin philosophy and practice, today we will explore a radically different and, in many ways, liberating vision. A vision that does not invite us, under any circumstances, to seek pain unnecessarily or to revel in suffering, but to fundamentally transform our relationship with it when, as is inevitable, it presents itself in our lives. A perspective that convincingly suggests that pain, when understood in its true nature and consciously embraced with an open mind and a courageous heart, can become one of our greatest and wisest teachers, a powerful catalyst for discovering an inner strength that we perhaps never knew we had, and an unsuspected doorway to a profound, authentic, and lasting personal transformation. Throughout this deep immersion, which I hope will be both enlightening and inspiring, we will break down this complex and often delicate subject into several interconnected facets. First, we will seek to understand the true nature of pain in its multiple dimensions: physical, emotional, mental, and, absolutely crucially, learn to clearly distinguish it from the suffering that so often accompanies it, like a self-imposed shadow, an additional burden that we ourselves, consciously or unconsciously, add to the original experience. Then we will explore in detail what it truly means, in practice, to embrace pain, and how this act, far from being a passive submission or a resigned defeat, is an active, courageous, and profoundly empowering practice of mindfulness and radical acceptance that opens the doors to unprecedented inner growth. We will discover, through examples and reflections, how, by consciously journeying through our difficulties, pains, and losses, we can awaken an unsuspected inner power, an unshakable resilience, and a strength of spirit that lie dormant, like a hidden treasure, within each of us. We will also investigate the fundamental and often underestimated role that our mind, our beliefs, and our perception play in actively modulating our subjective experience of pain, and how mental discipline, cultivated with patience and the constant practice of new ways of responding, can become our most valuable and reliable allies in this process of transformation. Finally, we will contemplate how pain, in one of life's most profound paradoxes, can be a privileged, albeit arduous, path towards deeper and more genuine self-knowledge, and towards a transformation that aligns us more closely with our most authentic essence and our highest life purpose. This is not, let me be clear, an easy path, nor one that promises instant solutions or magical formulas to eradicate pain from our lives. It requires courage to face what scares us, patience to persevere in practice, and an unwavering will to look squarely at that which, by instinct or habit, we would prefer to avoid or deny. But I assure you, with the conviction born from experience and the wisdom shared by so many who have trodden this path before us, that it is a path immensely worth traveling. Because by learning to navigate the inevitable pain of life with wisdom, consciousness, and a compassionate heart, we not only significantly alleviate our unnecessary suffering, but we also unlock our vast potential to live a fuller, more vibrant, more meaningful, and ultimately more profoundly human life. So if you are ready to challenge your usual perceptions, to question your automatic responses, and to explore the transformative power that lies hidden, waiting to be discovered, in your own experiences of pain, I invite you to accompany me on this journey of discovery and empowerment. Part 1. Understanding the nature of pain and suffering. To embark on this journey of transforming our relationship with pain, it is absolutely fundamental to begin by establishing a clear, nuanced, and profound understanding of what pain truly is in its diverse manifestations, and, even more crucially, how it qualitatively differs from suffering. Often, both in our everyday language and in our subjective inner experience, we tend to use these two terms, pain and suffering, interchangeably, as if they were mere synonyms describing the same reality. However, from a perspective of deep wisdom, cultivated over millennia by various contemplative traditions, there is a vital and profoundly operational distinction between them. This distinction, once understood and internalized, holds the key not to eliminating pain from life, which is impossible, but to freeing ourselves from a large part of the unnecessary and self-induced anguish that we so frequently experience. First, let's consider pain itself. Pain, in its most basic essence, is a signal. A complex and integrated response of our organism involving sensory, emotional, and cognitive dimensions. It is a reaction to a stimulus that we perceive as noxious, or to a dysfunction or imbalance occurring within us, whether at a physical, emotional, or mental level. Physical pain, for example, is the most tangible form and perhaps the most immediately recognized. It can arise from an external wound, a burn, a fracture, from an internal illness affecting our organs or tissues, or from chronic muscle tension accumulated through stress or poor posture. In all these cases, physical pain acts as a kind of biological alarm, an early warning system that alerts us that something needs our immediate attention, that there is an imbalance or potential damage that needs to be addressed to preserve our physical integrity and survival. Emotional pain, on the other hand, is equally real and can be as intense or even more so than physical pain. It manifests as deep sadness in the face of the loss of a loved one or something valued, as paralyzing fear or diffuse anxiety in the face of a perceived threat, real or imaginary, as searing anger at a flagrant injustice or a violation of our boundaries. These are natural and adaptive, effective responses to situations we perceive as adverse, threatening, or challenging to our psychological well-being and our sense of security in the world. We can even speak of mental or existential pain, which can arise from persistent confusion, profound existential doubt about the meaning of life, a rending internal conflict between important values, or a feeling of emptiness or lack of purpose. In essence, pain, in all these multiple and often interconnected forms, is an inherent, inescapable, and even necessary part of being alive, of being sentient and conscious beings in a complex, dynamic, and intrinsically impermanent world. To pretend to live a life completely exempt from any form of pain is therefore an aspiration that is not only unrealistic but also ultimately counterproductive. It would lead us to deny a fundamental facet of our own humanity, to attempt to amputate a part of our capacity to feel and respond to the world, and to live in a constant and exhausting struggle against reality itself. Now, this is where the distinction becomes truly critical and operational. Suffering, although intimately linked to pain and often triggered by it, is not exactly the same thing. Suffering, from the perspective we are exploring, can be understood as the additional, often massive and self-generated layer of anguish, resistance, aversion, and mental and emotional elaboration that we ourselves add, consciously or unconsciously, to primary pain. In other words, it is our reaction to pain, our thoughts about pain, our secondary emotions about pain, our stories about pain, rather than the sensation of pain itself. If pain is the initial sensation, the noxious stimulus, the open wound, suffering is the complex and often intricate narrative we construct around that pain, the intense internal struggle we wage against its presence, the inordinate amplification of its impact through our catastrophic thoughts, our reactive emotions, and our avoidance behaviors. As a well-known and profound adage attributed to Buddhism says, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Although this statement may sound overly simplistic or even insensitive in the face of experiences of extreme pain or deep trauma, it contains a fundamental and profoundly liberating truth about the agency, the room for maneuver, that we all have over our inner experience and our response to difficulties. We cannot always choose not to feel pain, but we can learn to choose not to add unnecessary layers of suffering. Let's think more carefully about how our mind often automatically and unexamined creates or amplifies suffering. One of the most common and pernicious ways is through resistance. When we experience pain, whether physical or emotional, our instinctive, almost biological reaction is usually to reject it, to oppose it, to fight fiercely against its presence, to wish desperately and vehemently for it to disappear as soon as possible. This resistance, this internal tension of not wanting what is, this denial of present reality, paradoxically, not only fails to alleviate the pain but very often intensifies, entrenches, and prolongs it, adding a heavy layer of frustration, helplessness, and physical and mental exhaustion. It's like trying to hold back a powerful ocean wave with bare hands. The intrinsic force of the wave does not diminish at all, but our effort, our tension, and our feeling of being overwhelmed increase exponentially. Resistance creates a kind of pain about pain. Another subtle but powerful way we generate suffering is through identification. This occurs when we merge completely with our pain, when we begin to believe at a very deep level of our being that we are our pain, that the pain defines our essential identity. Phrases like "I am an anxious person," "I am a failure," "I am a victim," "my life is just suffering" are examples of this identification. When this happens, we grant pain an immense and disproportionate power over our global identity and our life perspective. Pain ceases to be a transient experience, a passing cloud in the sky of our consciousness, and becomes a rigid label, a self-fulfilling prophecy that defines who we are and what we can expect from life, thereby drastically limiting our vision of ourselves, our capabilities, and future possibilities in the world. Mental rumination is another powerful and exhausting engine of suffering. This happens when our mind gets stuck, like a broken record, in an incessant loop of negative, often repetitive and unproductive thoughts about past pain, present pain, or future pain. We spend hours, days, even years mentally reliving over and over again the original wound, the offense, the loss, anticipating with fear and anxiety the pain that we believe will inevitably come, or obsessively and unansweringly asking ourselves, "Why me? What did I do to deserve this? When will this ordeal end?" When we get entangled in these patterns of rumination, what we are actually doing is keeping the flame of the original pain alive and, in fact, constantly fanning it with the fresh fuel of our own negative and fearful thoughts. The mind becomes an echo chamber that repeats and amplifies the original signal of pain, preventing us from finding an iota of inner peace, clarity, or a broader, more constructive perspective. Finally, the negative narratives that we construct and internalize around our painful experiences are absolutely fundamental in the creation and perpetuation of suffering. If we interpret a romantic loss as irrefutable proof that we are unworthy of love, or a professional failure as definitive confirmation of our uselessness and incompetence, or an illness as a divine punishment or a sign that the universe is conspiring against us, we are weaving a story, a personal script that traps us in victimhood, helplessness, and hopelessness. These narratives, often formed in childhood or during moments of great vulnerability, not only intensely color our perception of the painful event itself, but also cast a dark and limiting shadow over our future, diminishing our ability to see new possibilities, to learn from experience, or to find a constructive and transcendent meaning in our experiences. Let's consider some everyday examples to illustrate this dynamic. A simple headache, which is the primary physical pain, can become a source of intense and prolonged suffering if, in addition to the physical sensation, we begin to think, "This is going to completely ruin my day. I won't be able to concentrate on anything. I'm sure it's a symptom of something serious. What if I have a brain tumor? This always happens to me. I'm so prone to getting sick." The loss of a loved one, which entails an inevitable primary emotional pain such as grief, can be exacerbated and turned into chronic suffering by recurrent thoughts like, "I will never be happy again. My life has no meaning anymore without that person. It's a terrible injustice that they were taken away. I won't be able to bear it." A mistake made at work, which can generate primary mental pain such as shame or frustration, can transform into paralyzing and lasting suffering if we incessantly repeat to ourselves, "I'm a complete incompetent. I'm sure I'm going to be fired. Everyone will have noticed my ineptitude. I never do anything right." In each of these examples, the layer of thoughts, interpretations, and fears is what transforms the initial pain into much greater suffering. Understanding and deeply assimilating this distinction between the pain inherent in life and the suffering that we often manufacture, maintain, or magnify with our own mind is not a mere intellectual or philosophical exercise. It is the essential first step, the sine qua non, to begin to dismantle, with skill and compassion, the multiple layers of unnecessary suffering that so often afflict and limit us. It opens the door wide open to the real and tangible possibility of experiencing pain when it arrives in our lives, as it inevitably will in various forms and intensities, with a greater dose of equanimity, wisdom, presence, and ultimately with a lesser burden of self-induced and exhausting anguish. Recognizing that, although we do not always control the appearance of pain, we do have a certain and significant agency over how we respond to it, is profoundly empowering. And this understanding is the solid foundation upon which we can begin to build a healthier, more conscious, and ultimately more transformative relationship with this inevitable and often misunderstood facet of existence. Only when we see with crystal clarity how we contribute, often unknowingly, to our own suffering, can we begin to choose, moment by moment, consciously, a different path, a path of less reactivity and greater wisdom. Part 2: The path of embracing pain towards inner growth. Once we have begun to discern with greater clarity between primary pain, that inherent and inescapable signal of life, and secondary suffering, that often dense and self-imposed layer of anguish that we weave with our resistance, identification, and mental narratives, a fundamental and profoundly practical question arises: how can we, then, in a concrete way, relate to pain in a manner that not only minimizes unnecessary suffering, but also, and even more ambitiously, opens us to the real possibility of deep and significant inner growth? The answer, offered by many ancestral wisdom traditions, and which resonates strongly in the teachings of contemporary masters of introspection like Shi Heng Yi, can be summarized in an apparently simple, perhaps even counterintuitive expression for our culture, but profoundly radical and transformative in its essence: to embrace pain. It is absolutely crucial, from the very beginning of this exploration, to clarify precisely what embracing pain does not mean, to avoid misunderstandings that could trivialize or even pervert its profound meaning. It is not under any circumstances an invitation to masochism, to the active pursuit of pain for its own sake, nor to finding a kind of twisted pleasure in suffering. Nor does it imply a passive or fatalistic resignation in the face of difficulties, an attitude of simple resigned endurance, or the adoption of a role of a helpless and complaining victim before life's circumstances. Embracing pain is in no way synonymous with surrendering to despair, renouncing the search for relief or solutions when these are possible and appropriate, much less glorifying affliction or martyrdom. These are common and dangerous misunderstandings that can completely divert the true, courageous, and powerful meaning of this practice of inner transformation. So what does it truly mean to embrace pain in a constructive, conscious, and transformative sense? It means, firstly, and as a foundational step, a conscious, intentional, and radical acceptance of the presence of pain when it arises in our experience, in any of its forms. It is the act of fully acknowledging it, with honesty and without self-deception, without denying it, without minimizing it, with rationalizations, without trying to flee from it prematurely through distractions or emotional anesthetics. It is, in essence, saying an internal yes to the inescapable reality of our present experience, however uncomfortable, unpleasant, or even terrifying it may be. It is important to emphasize that this acceptance is not synonymous with approval. It does not mean that we like the pain, that we desire it, or that we consider it good in itself. It simply means that we stop investing our precious vital energy in the futile struggle against the incontrovertible fact that pain is here, now, present in our field of consciousness. This struggle, as we have seen previously, is one of the main and most potent sources of added suffering, of the tension that exacerbates the original pain. To accept is simply to acknowledge reality as it is in this moment. Secondly, embracing pain implies an attentive, curious, and fundamentally non-judgmental observation of the painful experience in all its complexity. Instead of being swept away and consumed by the whirlwind of catastrophic thoughts and reactive emotions that pain usually triggers almost automatically, we patiently cultivate the ability to take an internal step back, to create a small space of consciousness, and to observe the pain with a certain equanimous distance, almost like an impartial scientist observing a natural phenomenon to better understand it, or like an artist contemplating a complex landscape to capture its essence. We can ask ourselves, how exactly does this pain feel in my body? Is it a sharp and stabbing sensation, or rather dull and persistent? Is it a burning sensation, pressure, emptiness? Where is it precisely located? Does it radiate to other parts? Does it vary in intensity over time, or is it constant? What specific thoughts arise in my mind in direct response to this sensation of pain? Are they thoughts of fear of the future, of anger about the situation, of self-pity, of resentment towards others? What primary and secondary emotions accompany these thoughts and sensations? Can I simply notice all this complex web, physical sensations, thoughts, emotions, impulses, without immediately judging it as good or bad, right or wrong, without desperately clinging to the pleasant or rejecting with aversion the unpleasant? This practice of mindful observation, of being a compassionate witness to our own experience, gradually helps us to disidentify from the pain. We begin to see it not as the totality of who we are, but as something we experience temporarily, something that is passing through us. Thirdly, embracing pain means allowing the pain to be present in our field of consciousness without unnecessarily feeding it with more negative energy. This relates directly to the patterns of mental rumination and the construction of negative narratives that we discussed in the previous section. When we choose to embrace pain, we make a conscious and repeated effort not to add more fuel to the fire with our catastrophic thoughts about the future, our fierce self-criticisms about the past, or our victim stories that keep us trapped in helplessness. We acknowledge the pain, we feel it in the body, we observe it in the mind, but we actively try not to get entangled in the intricate and often dramatic stories that the mind, in its attempt to make sense of it or to protect itself, tends to weave around it. It's like allowing a physical wound to breathe, to have the necessary space for the natural healing process to occur, instead of constantly poking at it, irritating it, and preventing its healing. It implies a certain discipline to redirect attention when the mind gets caught in loops of negativity. One of the most powerful and transformative perspectives that arises when we begin to practice this conscious embrace of pain is to start seeing it not only as an affliction, but also as a signal, as a messenger that, although sometimes harsh in its delivery, often carries valuable and necessary information for our growth and well-being. Instead of perceiving pain solely as an implacable enemy to be eradicated as soon as possible, we can begin to ask ourselves with genuine curiosity and an open mind, what is this particular pain trying to tell me? Is there any deep physical or emotional need that is not being met, and that requires my urgent attention? For example, chronic back pain, beyond the physical discomfort, might be signaling the need to change my posture when sitting, to incorporate more exercise and flexibility into my life, or even, at a deeper level, to examine and reduce sources of chronic stress and the emotional burdens I am carrying on my shoulders. A deep and persistent sadness, beyond being simply depression, might be indicating that I need to process unresolved grief, that I long to connect more authentically with other human beings, or that it is time to reevaluate my life priorities and the purpose of my existence. Constant anxiety could be a sign that I am living incongruently with my most fundamental values, or that I am systematically avoiding facing certain fears or making necessary but difficult decisions. Pain, viewed in this way, through this lens of wisdom, ceases to be a simple nuisance or a meaningless tragedy and becomes a kind of internal compass, a guidance system that orients us towards those areas of our life that need healing, attention, care, or a conscious and courageous change. When we diligently cultivate this ability to embrace pain, our fundamental relationship with it begins to transform in profound and often surprising ways. Little by little, as we practice, pain ceases to be perceived predominantly as an implacable enemy to be feared, resisted, and fought at all costs. Instead, it begins to reveal itself, in unexpected ways, as an unlikely ally, a stern but fair teacher in its wisdom, or even as a potent catalyst for a spiritual awakening or a deeper level of consciousness. It is important to reiterate that this transformation does not happen overnight, as if by magic. It is an organic, gradual process that requires constant practice, infinite patience with ourselves, and a generous dose of self-compassion, especially in those moments when we fall back into old patterns of resistance or suffering. Let's briefly consider how this approach of embracing pain might apply to different types of common painful experiences. In the face of the inevitable grief from the loss of a loved one, embracing pain would mean allowing ourselves to feel the vastness of sadness, possible anger, confusion, loneliness, without judging ourselves for the intensity or duration of these emotions, without trying to artificially rush the grieving process, recognizing that these affective responses are a natural, necessary, and sacred part of the healing process and adaptation to a new reality. It would mean honoring the memory and legacy of the lost loved one, not through perpetual suffering that paralyzes us, but through the conscious integration of their love and teachings into our lives, allowing that loss to transform us in ways that enrich our humanity. In the face of failure in an important project, whether professional or personal, embracing pain would involve fully acknowledging the disappointment, frustration, and perhaps shame, but also, and crucially, diligently extracting the valuable lessons that the experience offers, identifying what we can learn about ourselves, our strategies, or the world, and how we can grow and improve from that experience, instead of getting trapped in destructive self-criticism or the paralyzing fear of trying again. Even in the face of chronic physical pain, a condition that can be so challenging, although the primary medical goal remains to alleviate the physical sensation as much as possible, the practice of embracing pain can mean learning to live with the residual sensation without it completely consuming our entire identity, our attention, or our ability to find joy, connection, and meaning in other aspects of life. It implies a shift in focus from what we have lost or can no longer do towards what we can still do, feel, and cultivate despite the pain, finding new ways of adaptation and enjoyment. The path of embracing pain is, in its deepest essence, a path of immense courage, of radical honesty with ourselves and our complete experience, and of a profound trust in the inherent human capacity to heal and grow. It is daring to remain present with an open consciousness and a tender heart, with the totality of our experience, including its most difficult, dark, and uncomfortable facets, trusting that by doing so, we will not only survive, but we will also be able to emerge on the other side stronger, wiser, more resilient, and more profoundly compassionate. It is discovering, often to our own surprise, the profound paradox that by ceasing to fight fiercely against pain, we begin to free ourselves from its tyranny and to find a peace, a freedom, and an inner wholeness that previously, in the midst of resistance, seemed absolutely unattainable. Part 3. Discovering inner power through adversity. When we venture with courage and determination along the path, often arduous and steep but ultimately profoundly rewarding, of embracing pain instead of instinctively fleeing from it or trying to suppress it, something truly extraordinary and transformative begins to happen in the deepest part of our being. Gradually, as we strip away the layers of resistance and fear layer by layer, we begin to discover, as if unearthing a long-forgotten treasure, a vast reserve of inner strength, an inexhaustible source of personal power that we perhaps never knew we possessed, or that, if we even intuited its existence, we had greatly underestimated. Adversity, when faced not with passive resignation, but with awakened consciousness and an unwavering will to learn and grow, has an almost alchemical, mysterious, and powerful way of transforming our perceived weaknesses and deepest fears into unexpected strengths and surprising inner resources, and of revealing the profound and inherent resilience that lies dormant like a seed awaiting the right conditions to germinate in the very core of our human being. Nature itself, in its infinite wisdom, offers us vivid and powerful metaphors to illustrate this process of transformation through challenge. Think, for example, of the chrysalis, the humble caterpillar. To reach its destiny of being a winged butterfly, must go through a period of intense and seemingly chaotic transformation, of an apparent dissolution of its previous form and profound darkness within the protective safety of the cocoon. It is a stage of vulnerability and surrender. Without that internal struggle, without that transformative pressure, without that surrender to the process of metamorphosis, the glorious emergence as a butterfly capable of flying freely would not be possible. Or consider a physical muscle in our own body. For it to strengthen, tone, and grow in capacity, it must be regularly and progressively subjected to tension, to an effort that takes it slightly beyond its current comfort zone, to a point of constructive fatigue. It is precisely this controlled stress and the subsequent phase of recovery and adaptation that produces muscle growth and increased strength. In an astonishingly analogous way, our inner fibers, our mental capacity to maintain clarity and focus, our emotional capacity to regulate our affective states, and our spiritual capacity to find meaning and connection are strengthened, expanded, and refined when they are challenged by the inevitable difficulties and adversities of life, and, crucially, when we respond to those challenges not with passive surrender or a victim mentality, but with an active, conscious, and courageous commitment to learn, adapt, and grow through the experience. By facing pain and adversity in this proactive and conscious manner, we begin to unearth, nurture, and cultivate a series of fundamental and interconnected qualities that together constitute this elusive but immensely real inner power. Firstly, and prominently, we discover and develop resilience. Resilience is not, as some might believe, the absence of difficulty or the magical ability to avoid pain and suffering altogether, nor is it an impenetrable armor that makes us insensitive. Rather, resilience is the dynamic and flexible ability to recover from setbacks, traumas, and losses, to adapt constructively to significant changes and adverse circumstances, and to move forward with our lives, often with a new perspective and renewed purpose, despite the wounds and scars we may carry. Each time we consciously journey through a painful experience, process it, and extract its lessons, emerging on the other side, not necessarily unscathed or unchanged, but having learned something valuable about ourselves and about life, our intrinsic capacity for resilience is strengthened, deepened. It's as if our psychological and emotional immune system becomes more robust, more adaptable, more capable of handling future infections of stress, disappointment, or adversity with greater wisdom and less dysregulation. We begin to trust more in our own ability to navigate life's storms because we remember, with a certainty born from direct experience, that we have navigated others before and have survived, and even have grown. Secondly, by embracing pain, we access an inner strength that far transcends the merely physical or simple stoic endurance. This strength manifests palpably at the mental level as an increased ability to maintain clarity of thought and perspective, even when under intense pressure or in the midst of emotional chaos, as an ability to discern between what we can control and what we cannot, focusing our energy on the former, and as a reduced tendency to be swept away and dominated by automatic negative, catastrophic, or self-limiting thoughts. It also manifests at the emotional level as a greater capacity to regulate our own emotions, to feel deeply the full range of human experience, from the most exuberant joy to the deepest sorrow, without being completely overwhelmed or hijacked by them, and to find a point of balance and equanimity even when emotional waves are intense and turbulent. And equally importantly, this strength manifests at the spiritual or existential level, as a deeper and more heartfelt connection with our fundamental values and our sense of purpose in life, a purpose that often persists and even clarifies, despite difficulties, and as a fundamental faith or trust in something larger than ourselves, whether we call it life, the universe, nature, a transcendent principle, or God, a trust that sustains us in the darkest moments. Thirdly, the courageous and conscious act of facing pain, of not shying away from it, directly cultivates courage. It is important to understand that courage in this context is not the absence of fear. Fear is a natural and often adaptive human emotion. True courage is the unwavering will to act in accordance with our values and commitments, despite the presence of fear, doubt, or uncertainty. Each time we consciously choose not to avoid what is difficult or uncomfortable for us, dare to fully feel what is unpleasant or painful, take a step forward into the unknown despite our fears, we are exercising and strengthening our courage muscle. And this courage, once cultivated in one area of our life, tends to radiate and have a positive impact on other areas, allowing us, for example, to take risks more aligned with our dreams and aspirations, to set necessary and healthy boundaries in our interpersonal relationships, or to defend with integrity what we deeply believe in, even when doing so is unpopular or entails personal cost. Paradoxically and beautifully, one of the most exquisite and moving flowers that can sprout from the seemingly arid and hostile terrain of pain is compassion. When we have experienced pain firsthand, when we have struggled with our own shadows, fears, and vulnerabilities, our ability to understand, empathize, and genuinely connect with the suffering of others expands exponentially. Pain in this sense humanizes us profoundly, strips us of arrogance and the illusion of invulnerability, and intimately connects us with the shared experience of fragility, impermanence, and interdependence that characterizes all sentient life. This compassion, born not from theory but from one's own healed or healing wound, is an immensely powerful and transformative force in the world. It impels us to want to alleviate the suffering of others, to offer unconditional support, to listen with the heart, and to build bridges of human connection based on authenticity, shared vulnerability, and the recognition of our common humanity. And equally crucially, self-compassion also flourishes in this process. gradually replacing harsh self-criticism and relentless judgment with a deeper and more loving tenderness, patience, and understanding of our own struggles, imperfections, and needs. Throughout human history, and undoubtedly in our own lives and the lives of those around us, there are abundant, inspiring, and moving stories of people who have managed, often against all odds, to transform their deepest pain, their most heartbreaking losses, and their most overwhelming adversities into an inexhaustible source of inner power, wisdom, and life purpose. Think of historical or contemporary figures who, after overcoming devastating life-threatening illnesses, have dedicated the rest of their existence to helping others going through similar situations, offering hope and guidance. Or those individuals who, having experienced unimaginable traumatic losses, such as that of a child or their entire community, have found the strength to create foundations, social movements, or initiatives that seek to prevent future tragedies and generate positive and lasting change in the world. Or consider the countless artists, writers, poets, and musicians who have managed to channel their most intimate experiences of anguish, loneliness, or despair into works of art that move, heal, and inspire millions of people across generations. These are not mere superhuman exceptions or isolated cases, they are eloquent testimonies to the inherent potential that resides in every human being to transmute the heavy lead of suffering into the shining gold of wisdom, compassion, and significant contribution. Each of us, in our own unique and personal way, has the capacity to find profound meaning and renewed strength, even in the darkest and most challenging experiences of life, if we choose to face them with consciousness and an open heart. It is vitally important to emphasize that this inner power we speak of is not something magical, mysterious, or esoteric reserved only for a select few, for saints or heroes. It is not at all about acquiring mystical superpowers or supernatural abilities. It is rather, and much more accessibly and realistically, about the patient development, conscious integration, and courageous expression of fundamental and eminently cultivable human qualities: deep self-awareness, purposeful discipline, unwavering patience, perseverance in the face of obstacles, radical acceptance of what we cannot change, gratitude for what we do have, the unique human capacity to find and create meaning even in the midst of suffering, and unconditional compassionate love towards ourselves and towards all beings. It is precisely these qualities, seemingly simple yet profoundly powerful, that when nurtured and strengthened through the conscious and courageous practice of facing adversity, constitute the true and lasting essence of our inner power. It is a power that does not seek to dominate others or control the external world to conform to our desires, but rather focuses wisely and humbly on the mastery of our own inner world, on our ability to respond to life in all its complexity with wisdom, integrity, resilience, and an open and compassionate heart, no matter how challenging the external circumstances may be. It is, ultimately, the supreme power to choose our response, to find inner freedom even when surrounded by external chains. Part 4. The role of mind, discipline, and constant practice. We have explored at length how the conscious and courageous embrace of pain can, paradoxically yet profoundly, unveil an unsuspected inner strength and open us to significant growth. Now, it is absolutely crucial to direct our attention towards the internal tools and conscious processes that enable us to navigate this challenging yet immensely transformative path with greater skill and wisdom. In this regard, our mind, with its intricate and astonishing capacities for perception, interpretation, memory, and projection, plays an absolutely central and determining role. And alongside it, discipline, understood not as an external imposition, but as a conscious self-commitment and constant practice, as the diligent and repeated application of new ways of being and responding, emerge not as burdensome loads or tedious tasks, but as indispensable and profoundly empowering allies in the art of transforming our fundamental relationship with pain and consequently with the entirety of life itself. Our mind, that inner universe of thoughts, beliefs, images, and narratives, can be, simultaneously and often without our full awareness, our greatest battlefield, where we wage endless and exhausting internal struggles, and at the same time our most fertile garden, where we can consciously cultivate the seeds of wisdom, compassion, and inner peace. It is in essence the crucible where our subjective experience of pain is forged, moment by moment, It is a profound and often difficult truth to accept that it is not so much the painful event itself, the physical injury, the emotional loss, the objective failure that dictates the magnitude of our suffering, but rather our habitual thoughts, our deeply ingrained beliefs, and our automatic perceptions and interpretations about that event that, to a far greater extent than we usually imagine, determine the intensity, duration, and quality of our resulting suffering. If we perceive pain as an insurmountable catastrophe that annihilates us, as an unequivocal sign of our own fundamental deficiency or unworthiness, or as a cruel and undeserved injustice of fate against which we are powerless, our experience will inevitably be one of overwhelming anguish, hopelessness, and victimization. Conversely, if we manage to cultivate a mind that is capable of observing pain with a certain objectivity and healthy detachment, a mind that can interpret adversity as a stimulating challenge or as a valuable opportunity for learning and growth, or a mind that can, even in the midst of the deepest affliction, find a glimmer of meaning or transcendent purpose, then our experience of pain, although still intrinsically painful at its core, will be imbued with a different quality, more manageable, less terrifying, perhaps even ultimately empowering. This is where mental discipline, inspired and refined by ancestral wisdom practices such as those found in the Shaolin tradition, Stoic philosophy, or the various schools of Buddhist mindfulness and meditation, becomes an invaluable tool, a true treasure. It is important to reiterate that we are not talking about a rigid authoritarian and punitive discipline imposed by an iron will that seeks to suppress or control. Rather, we refer to a loving, patient, and persistent training of our attention, our awareness, and our capacity for inner choice. Some of the fundamental techniques and approaches of this mental discipline include: 1. Equanimous observation of thoughts and emotions. This is perhaps the cornerstone of all transformative mental discipline practice. It involves learning through repeated practice to observe the constant and incessant flow of thoughts, images, memories, and emotions that arise and fade in the field of our mind, especially in response to pain, without automatically identifying with them, without hastily judging them as good or bad, right or wrong, and crucially, without being swept away and dominated by their often turbulent content. It's like calmly sitting on the bank of a flowing river and watching the water representing our thoughts and emotions pass by, sometimes peacefully, sometimes furiously, but without the compulsive need to jump into the current and be carried away by it. This practice of detached and equanimous observation creates vital inner space, a healthy and operational distance between the observer, our pure consciousness, our inner witness, and the observed, our changing mental and emotional contents. From this space of greater perspective and reduced reactivity, we can make wiser and more conscious decisions about how to respond to our inner experience, instead of simply reacting in an automatic, conditioned, and impulsive manner. 2. Non-identification with pain. When we experience intense or persistent pain, whether physical or emotional, it is very easy and almost natural for our identity, our sense of who we are, to begin to merge and become confused with that pain. We start to think and feel, at a very deep level, I am a suffering person, my pain defines me, there is nothing more to me than this pain. Mental discipline, in this context, helps us to remember and internalize the profound truth that we are much, much more than our transient pain. Pain is an experience we are having at a given moment, a sensation, an emotion, a set of thoughts, but it is not the totality or the immutable essence of who we are as complex and multidimensional human beings. We can learn, with practice, to change our internal language and therefore our perception. Instead of saying my knee is killing me and I am an invalid, we can learn to observe and describe the experience with greater precision and detachment. I am experiencing an intense sensation of sharp pain in my right knee at this moment. Or instead of I am a sad and wretched person, we can acknowledge I am feeling a deep wave of sadness at this moment, and that's okay, it's part of my human experience. This subtle yet incredibly powerful shift in language and perspective can significantly reduce the burden of added suffering and the feeling of being trapped by pain. 3. Conscious focus on the present moment. A large part of our suffering related to pain and to many other difficulties in life stems from the almost universal tendency of our mind to wander, to incessantly project itself into the past, ruminating on how the pain began, who or what was to blame, how wonderful things were before the pain, or reliving past traumas, or into the future, anticipating with fear and anxiety that the pain will worsen, that it will never disappear, that it will ruin all our plans and hopes. The discipline of anchoring our attention again and again with kindness and firmness in the present moment, in the real and concrete sensations of the here and now, in the rhythm of our breath, in the sounds around us, in the texture of the objects we touch, can be a powerful and effective antidote to this form of self-induced mental torture. In the present moment, when we observe it with attention and without judgment, we often discover that the pain, although real and undeniable, is more manageable, less catastrophic than our fearful and projective mind makes us believe. Furthermore, and this is crucial, only in the present moment do we have the ability to take constructive actions, to choose a different response, to apply the tools we are learning. 4. Gentle questioning of automatic negative thoughts. Our mind, especially when under the influence of pain or stress, has a marked tendency to generate a torrent of negative, often distorted, catastrophic and self-critical thoughts about ourselves. I'm not strong enough to bear this, about others, no one understands or supports me, and about the world or the future, this will never get better, my life is ruined. Mental discipline involves learning to identify these automatic thoughts as they arise, not to believe them blindly as if they were absolute and immutable truths, and to subject them to a gentle but firm scrutiny, a kind of internal Socratic dialogue. We can ask ourselves, is this thought really 100% true? What concrete evidence do I have in favor of this belief, and what evidence do I have against it? Is there another way, perhaps more balanced or constructive, to view this situation? What would I say to a dear friend who was having these same thoughts? This process of cognitive restructuring, of challenging and reframing our habitual thought patterns, can dismantle many of the self-limiting and pessimistic narratives that so potently feed and perpetuate our suffering. Now, it is fundamental to recognize and accept that these valuable skills of mental discipline are not acquired overnight, nor simply by reading about them. They require, like any other complex and valuable skill in life, constant, diligent and patient practice. This is in essence the profound meaning of the term Gong Fu, Gong Fu in the rich Chinese tradition, which is often translated simplistically and narrowly as Kung Fu, referring only to martial arts, but which actually refers to the skill, dexterity or mastery acquired in any field through prolonged, patient, disciplined and focused effort. Changing deeply ingrained mental habits, sometimes for decades, especially those related to our instinctive response to pain and adversity, is arduous but rewarding work that is done day by day, moment by moment, through small but consistent and cumulative steps. In fact, we can come to see pain itself, when it arises, not as an enemy to be avoided, but as a privileged training ground for our mind, an opportunity to put into practice and strengthen these new skills. Each time a painful physical sensation, a difficult emotion to navigate, or a distressing thought that disturbs us arises, we have a new and valuable opportunity to practice, to observe with equanimity and without judgment, not to blindly identify with the experience, to anchor ourselves firmly in the present moment, to question our automatic and negative narratives. At first, it is very likely that we will feel clumsy, that we will be swept away again and again by our habitual reactions of resistance, fear or self-pity. This is normal and part of the process. But with each conscious attempt, with each small moment in which we manage to respond in a slightly different, wiser, more compassionate way, we are literally strengthening new neural pathways in our brain, we are reconfiguring our stress response, we are cultivating a new and more resilient way of being. Constant practice can take many forms, and it is important to find those that resonate with us and that we can sustainably integrate into our lives. It can be a formal daily meditation, even if it's only for a few minutes in the morning or evening. It can be the informal practice of bringing mindfulness to our daily activities, such as eating, walking, or listening. It can be the commitment to write regularly in a journal to process our thoughts and emotions reflectively. It can be the reading of inspiring texts and perennial wisdom that remind us of these fundamental truths and motivate us to continue practicing. What is important is not so much the specific form of the practice, but the regularity, the clear intention, and above all, the attitude of kindness, patience, and perseverance with which we approach it, especially towards ourselves when we stumble or stray from the path. In the end, the fundamental role of the trained mind, conscious discipline, and constant practice is to empower us profoundly. They teach us, through direct experience, that although we may not always be able to control the appearance of pain in our lives, nor the nature of the difficulties we face, we do have a significant and inalienable capacity to influence how we experience that pain, how we respond to it, and ultimately, how we allow it to transform us for the better. it is a path of continuous self-discovery, where each challenge, each moment of pain becomes a precious opportunity to polish the multifaceted diamond of our consciousness and reveal its inherent brilliance. Part 5. Pain as a path to self-knowledge and profound transformation. As we journey courageously and perseveringly along this path of changing our fundamental relationship with pain, as we diligently cultivate mental clarity, purposeful discipline, and an ever-deepening acceptance of our present experience, we begin to glimpse and experience one of the most profound, counterintuitive, and paradoxical truths of human existence: pain, that so often unwelcome, feared, and resisted visitor, can in fact become an extraordinarily powerful and direct path towards deeper, more authentic self-knowledge and towards a truly significant and lasting personal transformation. Far from being merely an obstacle to overcome, a useless burden to endure, or a meaningless tragedy that diminishes us, pain, when navigated consciously, with an open heart and a mind willing to learn, has the astonishing capacity to strip us of the superficial, the inauthentic, and to connect us viscerally with the most essential, true, and resilient aspects of our being. One of the primary ways in which pain facilitates this profound self-knowledge is through its undeniable ability to shatter, or at least crack, our social masks and our habitual psychological defenses. In our daily lives, especially when things are going relatively well and we feel comfortable and secure, it is very easy, almost inevitable, to live on the surface of ourselves, predominantly identified with our social roles: parent, professional, friend, our material possessions, our intellectual opinions and beliefs, or the public image that we have so carefully constructed and wish to project to the world. We build, often unconsciously, elaborate facades, emotional armors to protect ourselves from vulnerability, to avoid the judgment of others, and to maintain a sense of control and predictability. However, when intense pain erupts in our lives, whether in the form of a debilitating physical illness, a devastating emotional loss, a humiliating professional failure, or a profound existential crisis that shakes our very foundations, these carefully constructed facades often crack, falter, and on occasion completely crumble. Pain, in its rawness and immediacy, has a direct and sometimes brutal way of confronting us with our fundamental vulnerability, with our inherent fragility, with our shared humanity in all its imperfection and transience. In that forced nakedness, in that absence of the habitual defenses that previously sustained us, we are presented with a unique, albeit often uncomfortable, opportunity to see ourselves with a radical honesty, with a clarity that perhaps before, in the comfort of our illusions, was elusive or even frightening to us. In that space of open vulnerability, we can discover primary fears we didn't know we had, deeply ingrained attachments that limited and conditioned us, or conversely, and equally surprisingly, we can unearth unsuspected strengths, inner resources we were completely unaware of, and a capacity for resilience that emerges precisely from that acceptance of our own fragility. Furthermore, the experience of pain, especially when it is prolonged or of great intensity, often compels us, almost by the force of circumstances, to review, re-evaluate, and clarify our true priorities and our most fundamental values in life. When life hits us hard, when we face a serious illness that threatens our existence, the irreparable loss of a loved one that leaves an immense void, a professional failure that shatters our work identity, or an existential crisis that questions the very meaning of everything we do, the trivial concerns, superficial ambitions, and vain distractions that previously consumed much of our mental and emotional energy tend to fade away, to lose their false brilliance and apparent importance. Suddenly, as if a veil has been torn, what truly matters, what is truly essential for a life of meaning and fulfillment, becomes painfully but also liberatingly clear. Perhaps we discover, with a mixture of surprise and regret, that the incessant pursuit of material success, social status, or external recognition was at its core an empty and exhausting endeavor, and that what we truly yearn for in the deepest part of our heart is authentic human connection, unconditional love, a life purpose that transcends our small self, or a serene and lasting inner peace. Pain, in this sense, acts as a powerful alchemical filter, separating with relentless precision the nutritious grain from the insubstantial chaff in our lives, showing us with a sometimes blinding clarity what is truly worth living for, fighting for, loving for, and if necessary, even dying for. It is not uncommon for many people who have gone through near-death experiences, serious illnesses, or profound losses to report a radical and positive transformation in their life priorities, beginning to live thereafter with a greater sense of gratitude for the small things, a more vivid appreciation for the present moment, and a renewed focus on what is truly essential and nourishing for the soul. Pain, in addition to clarifying our values, can also be a powerful and unexpected catalyst for significant and often absolutely necessary change in our lives. Sometimes, without fully realizing it, we find ourselves trapped in self-destructive behavior patterns, in toxic or unfulfilling interpersonal relationships, in jobs that drain us and alienate us from our true potential, or in lifestyles that, far from nourishing us, make us sick physically, emotionally, or spiritually. In these situations, the inertia of habit, the paralyzing fear of change and the unknown, or the deceptive comfort of the familiar, even if dysfunctional, prevent us from making the difficult but necessary decisions required to free ourselves and move forward. In these circumstances, the pain, the growing and sometimes unbearable suffering that emanates from that deep incongruity between how we live and how we yearn to live can become so intense, so pressing, that it finally impels us to act, to break with the old and limiting, and to venture courageously towards the new and unknown, even if the latter also involves its own share of uncertainty and fear. It's as if pain at its peak becomes the existential lever that jolts us out of our stagnation, out of our illusory comfort zone. Although the process of change itself can be, and often is, painful and challenging, it is frequently the indispensable prelude to a more authentic life, more aligned with our values, fuller, and ultimately more satisfying. Pain, in these cases, can awaken us from our existential lethargy, shaking us to our foundations so that we rebuild our lives on more solid and true bases. It is important to understand that when we integrate the profound lessons learned through our painful experiences, we do not return to being exactly who we were before the pain touched us. There is a transformation that occurs, a kind of accelerated maturation of the soul, a deepening of our being. We can emerge from these trials, from these purifying fires, with greater practical wisdom about life, deeper and more genuine compassion, both towards ourselves with our own imperfections and struggles, and towards others, recognizing their shared humanity, greater humility before the mysteries of existence, and a more vivid, more heartfelt appreciation for the incredible preciousness and inherent fragility of every moment of our existence. The scars that pain inevitably leaves on us, both visible and invisible, can become, if we so choose, not symbols of defeat or bitterness, but eloquent testimonies of our resilience, constant reminders of the essential truths we have learned on the arduous path of growth. It is not therefore about forgetting the pain or pretending it never happened, but about integrating it in such a way that it enriches our understanding of life, strengthens our character, and impels us to live with greater fullness and purpose. This profound process of self-knowledge and transformation through pain is not, however, automatic nor guaranteed by the mere fact of experiencing difficulties. It requires, indispensably, our active and conscious participation, our unwavering will to look inward with honesty, even when what we find is uncomfortable or painful, to ask ourselves the difficult questions about ourselves and our lives, and to be radically open to learning, changing, and growing, even when that means letting go of old identities or cherished beliefs. But when we commit wholeheartedly to this path of introspection and transformation, we discover, often with astonishment, that pain does not have to be the end of the story, nor a condemnation to a life of misery. It can be, in fact, and frequently is, the beginning of a new, richer and deeper chapter of our lives, a chapter written not despite the pain, but partly thanks to it, with the indelible ink of hard-won wisdom and compassion born from lived and transcended experience itself. This is how the heavy, opaque lead of suffering can, through an inner alchemical process, be transmuted into the bright, radiant gold of a life lived with greater authenticity, meaning, and an unwavering, luminous life purpose. Conclusions. We have journeyed together down a fascinating and at times perhaps profoundly challenging path, exploring the multiple and complex facets of pain and the intricate relationship we hold with it throughout our lives. We have unraveled, or at least begun to, the crucial and often elusive difference between inevitable pain, that sensory and emotional experience inherent to the human condition and to life itself, and the suffering that so frequently and subtly we ourselves manufacture or amplify through our instinctive resistance, our limiting identifications, and our automatic unexamined mental narratives. We have contemplated the radical and, for many, counterintuitive possibility of embracing pain, understanding this not as a form of masochism or passive resignation in the face of adversity, but as an active, courageous, and profoundly conscious practice of acceptance and presence that can lead us in unexpected ways to inner growth of surprising magnitude. We have glimpsed how, by choosing to journey through our difficulties and losses with an attitude of courage, openness, and curiosity, we can discover and awaken an inner power, an unshakable resilience, and a strength of spirit that, though perhaps unknown or underestimated, lie dormant deep within each of us, waiting to be activated. We have recognized the absolutely fundamental role that our mind and our subjective perception play in shaping and modulating our experience of pain, and how mental discipline, cultivated with patience and care, along with the constant practice of new ways of responding, become indispensable tools and powerful allies on this arduous yet rewarding journey of transformation. And finally, we have considered the profound and often paradoxical truth that pain, that so frequently feared and rejected visitor, can be, if we approach it with wisdom, a privileged and direct path towards deeper, more authentic self-knowledge and towards a personal transformation that aligns us more closely and coherently with our truest essence and our highest life purpose. The fundamental essence of this message, which is nourished and inspired by the perennial wisdom accumulated by countless philosophical and spiritual traditions that have explored the human condition for millennia, is that although we cannot always choose or control all the external circumstances that life presents to us, and although pain in its diverse and sometimes overwhelming forms is an inevitable and recurring visitor in our earthly existence, we do have, each one of us, an inherent, inalienable, and profoundly powerful capacity to choose how we respond internally to that pain. We have the capacity, if we so decide and commit to the practice, to transform our fundamental relationship with it, to move from being its passive and reactive victims, swept away by its waves, to becoming active, conscious, and resilient learners of the valuable lessons that, often cryptically or in disguise, pain brings with it. This is not, let me emphasize once more, a call for the simplistic denial of pain, nor for the forced suppression or spiritual bypassing of our genuine and often difficult emotions. Quite the contrary, it is a courageous and compassionate invitation to feel fully, to be radically present with the totality of our human experience, however difficult, uncomfortable, or even terrifying it may be at certain moments. But it is about doing so with an expanded awareness, with a perspective that allows us not only to endure pain, but also to find in it a possible meaning, a source of unexpected strength, and an opportunity for a growth that makes us wiser, more compassionate, and more profoundly human. The final invitation I extend to you with all sincerity and hope is to take these reflections and understandings beyond the realm of words and intellectual concepts, to integrate them vividly and palpably into the very fiber of your being and into the fabric of your daily life. Begin with small steps, with modest yet significant gestures. The next time you encounter an experience of pain on your path, whether it be physical, emotional, or mental in nature, try, even if only for a brief moment, to apply one of the principles or tools we have explored together in this space. Try, for example, to observe with curiosity and without judgment your automatic reactions, both internal and external. Gently question the limiting or catastrophic narratives that your mind almost instantly begins to weave around the painful sensation. Make a conscious space within yourself to feel the emotion or sensation without the urgent need to fix it, change it, or flee from it immediately. Always remember that the immense power to transform your experience of pain, and therefore to transform the quality and direction of your life, resides ultimately not in external circumstances or magical solutions, but within each of you. It is a power that is cultivated with infinite patience, with a courage that is renewed each day, and with an unwavering and tender compassion towards yourselves at every step of the way. I sincerely hope this exploration has offered you valuable tools and perspectives, not only to better understand the decision-making process, but to feel more empowered when facing it. The true power of these teachings, like that of any practical knowledge, inevitably lies in their consistent and reflective application in the laboratory of our own experience. I encourage you therefore to choose at least one idea, one nugget of wisdom that has resonated with you specially during our conversation today, and to actively consider how you can begin to integrate it into your life, not tomorrow or next week, but starting right now, in the small choices that present themselves. Your journey towards more masterful, more conscious and more aligned decision-making is intrinsically personal, unique and non-transferable, and is, by its very nature, in constant and beautiful evolution. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for accompanying me on this profound and significant journey of exploration and discovery. Always remember, like a beacon in the night, every decision, however large or small it may seem, is a precious opportunity to express your best version, to learn, to grow, and to consciously shape the life you long for. Until next time, and may your choices, all of them, always guide you with wisdom and compassion towards light, truth, and fulfillment.